Hello everyone, it's time for another deck profile, and it's on a deck that I never thought I was gonna build, but I always kinda liked, and this time it's the Venus Luquier deck, or you could even just simply call it the Luquier deck or the Silverthorn deck for the D format, because overall I really like Luquier's design, but never really got into its playstyle until more recently, especially with Venus Luquier playing more aggressive, and overall I just kinda like the new form with Venus Luquier. And it was also nice to have an encounter deck that doesn't play strides as well. And overall it's just fun playing with Soul and then just doing more magic tricks by popping them out from Soul. So it's just overall a fun deck, and it was a deck I never thought I was going to build until I saw the Venus Luquier. But anyway, how the deck functions is, well, like typical Pale Moon, and in a way it's similar to Direful Doll if you want to compare to that, but this came out first, is that you just fill up your Soul and then just call stuff from Soul. That's basically the playstyle of the deck. Although the way how it calls from Soul is a little different, especially comparing to Direful Doll, is that you're going to be calling multiple graded units. You're not going to be calling anything with same grade. They all have to be different grades, but you're going to mass call them. Venus Luquier basically does the same exact thing, but now more aggressive because with more extra power and even crit for herself with usage of energy instead of counterblast, which is going to be very key because there's only one card in this whole entire deck that uses energy, and is Venus Luquier herself. And that does so much is that you can add cards that just use energy in this deck, which I might actually do. But so far I like the deck the way it is, even though the one big inherent weakness for the deck right now still is it's very key piece reliant, and it relies a lot on early game setup. As you can tell, you still run the original Luquier. Of course, it's a previous form, so you're going to need it for the evolved form. But other than being key piece reliant, it's still just overall pretty cool and fun to play. I'm not going to say it's the best deck in the world, but it is just overall pretty fun to play. And just the shenanigans you can do and stuff that you can run. And you do have other generic options for this deck as well that can work pretty well for the deck. But anyway, let's begin with the deck profile with, of course, the Ride deck. So we start off with the starter, Silverthorn Assistant Ilona. You should just run this starter just because it's still Pale Moon, because there will be some cards that interact with the Pale Moon clan. In which we go to the Assistant Irina, which when rolled upon by a Pale Moon unit, you can look at top 7 cards from your deck to choose one to Soul Charge. And the choice Soul Charging is very helpful because this deck is very key piece reliant, so just keep that in mind. And then it has the second skill of when placed on rear guard while your Vanguard is Luquier, you can Soul Charge 1. This skill does come up a bit just because you will sometimes call this from Soul, especially from Luquier. And then we go to the grade through Lillian. When you ride a Pale Moon on top, Soul Charge 1 and then choose a card from your Soul and put it to hand, which can be pretty nice. Especially the cards that you don't want in Soul, it can go back to hand, which is also pretty nice as well. And it also fills your Luquier skills. In which we got the other skill where when placed on Rearguard or Guardian, if your Vanguard is Luquier, shield plus 5k and power plus 5k until the end of turn, which is fine as well. It does come up a bit sometimes, but you mainly use it for the Ride deck. In which now we go to Venus Luquier. So Venus Luquier, if you have the original Luquier in Soul, hence why you're going to be running the original, it gets plus 5k, and if your opponent's Vanguard is at least a grade 3, your whole front row gets plus 5k. So mass power up right there, which is of course going to be very helpful, and I love that already. In which the second skill is that act Vanguard once per turn, Energy Blast 3, put a card from your hand to Soul, and then choose as many cards from grade 3 or less with different grades and call them to rearguard. Meaning that you call 0, 1, 2, and 3. You can call up to 4, which is pretty nice. That's just overall pretty good right there, especially since the first skill already gives you mass power, the second skill just pops everything out. Now, one inherent problem with this is that sometimes it can mess up your board, especially with the one weird column, but luckily you have other cards that can fix that, so it's not entirely bad. And another nice thing is that it uses energy. No counterblast. This is the only card that uses energy in this deck. And it actually just kind of makes it overall pretty nice that you have a lot of cards that you could just run just because of energy reasons. And comparing this to the original Luquier that uses counterblast, because this uses energy instead of counterblast, this deck now has so much counterblast to use that you could even run cards that uses counterblast as well. But anyway, we go to the last skill where when this card attacks, put 2 rearguards to Soul, draw a card, plus 5k power, and if your opponent's Vanguard is at least grade 3, plus crit as well. Something that Luquier was lacking is extra pressure, and I just love this extra pressure as well. High power attack with some extra crit, and it's on battle too, which has some interesting interaction with some Desire Devils. because some of the Desire Devil, where when you put it to soul by card ability, skill activates. And since you're doing it in battle, you can actually get some weird, funny interactions with Luquier here. And I really love that as well. So overall, just pretty cool new upgrade. Sure, it's still piece reliant. As you can tell, you need to set up your soul, but you got a bunch of support that can help you with that, even though that is also an inherent weakness of the deck because it requires a lot of pieces. But overall, a cool new upgrade. In which we go to the main deck itself. First off, you run 2 copies of the original Luquier because, of course, you need it. And 2, there's so many ways that you could just put this to soul, especially through other means, especially from regular Pale Moon means as well, that you don't really need to run 4. In fact, you could even discard this for the ride deck and then just choice soul charge from the drop. So it's not even bad to just even ditch it. I don't run 1 because just in case of damage zone reasons, so just having the second one is just nice. But you don't really use this for its skills at all, unless maybe against Vladimir, where you can act once per turn, counterblast 1, put a card from your hand to soul, and choose 3 units with different grades and call them to rearguard. And then if your opponent's at least grade 3, plus 5k. I mean, yeah, the plus 5k must be to the called units, which can suck compared to Venus Luquier, in which we go to the other skill where at the end of turn you can put 2 rearguards to soul to draw a card, which is not really good timing either. So you don't really ride this at all, you just use it for Venus Luquier. In which, of course, we must run 3 more copies of Venus Luquier just because of Persona Ride. And then we run the Luquier Order card, where you can even play this from soul, and you counterblast 1 by playing it, while your Vanguard is Luquier. You choose one of your rearguards and it gets this ability, where when your Vanguard attacks, you can put that unit to soul, and then choose a Pale Moon unit from your soul and call it to rearguard. Which is of course going to be pretty good, because there's going to be a lot of different Pale Moons that you can call that are pretty decent, and it just basically gives you another attack. And once again, you only run 2 because there's going to be other ways to put this to soul, especially from your new support. Like this next card, which is the new card. It might even be the dragon from Venus Luquier's art. Showered Applause Dragon, where it's counted as Pale Moon, while your Vanguard is Pale Moon. That's key, because as you can tell from the last card, you need Pale Moons. In which the next skill is that, when placed on rearguard, if your Vanguard is Pale Moon, choose a card from your drop zone and put it to soul, which is of course going to be very helpful, because that's choice souls charging from the drop zone, and here's one way to do it. And resetting your soul every time is very helpful. But it's also used for the third skill, where during your turn, it plays from soul during the turn, plus 5k, and if your opponent's Vanguard is at least grade 3, plus 10k instead. So it's a big beater that can just refill your soul, and the cool trick about most of the Pale Moon cards is that you can put this to soul and then call it back from soul. So that's also pretty cool as well. And because it counts as Pale Moon, that's another key factor why you should just run this. So that's it for the grade 3 lineup. Now for the grade 2 lineup. So first off, to the main grade 2 is Silverthorn Rising Dragon. So when placed on rearguard, put a card from your hand to soul, draw, which helps you set up. Especially on the early game, this is much more important. In which the second skill is that during your turn, if your Vanguard is Luquier, if you called at least 2 units from soul, plus 10k. If you called 4, plus another 10k. So it's just basically a big beater and a setup card. So you just must run this at 4. This card is basically one of your main soul charge targets as well, just like the previous card from the new grade 3, because it's one of those key pieces that you just want to keep spamming from soul, and this also sets it up as well, so this is another one. In which we go to the promo that got reprinted from Festival Collection, Steam Performer Tagoot, which looks like your Chronicle, which I don't know why it's a Pale Moon unit card basically. But anyway, when put to soul by card ability, even by soul charging, if your Vanguard is Pale Moon, you can bind this card and then choose a grade 3 card from your deck or drop zone and put it to soul. And of course, if it's from deck, shuffle it. This is the card that really helps out a lot. It basically sets up any of your grade 3s you want into your soul, which is basically all your grade 3s except for your Persona Ride. This is just a must run just for some extra consistency. It's also another grade 2 unit, so it's just something that you can call if you need to, if you wish to anyway. And also it can help you recycle some of your key pieces to soul, and it's just another way to do so, and more ways to do so the better. So that's it for the grade 2 lineup. Time for the grade 1 lineup. So first off, Silverthorn Rising Dragon, 2 copies. This is a decent card for some extra power, because when placed from soul to back row rearguard, while you have a Luquier Vanguard, you can soul blast 1 to choose one of your Vanguards. It gets the ability where your whole front row gets those 5k power in the end turn. The only thing is, like, there might be some other better cards for setup, because sometimes one of the issues I found is setting up but this is also one of the good cards to put in Soul and also some more power. So I say 2 copies is good, but there might be other important cards that you might want to run over this, but at the same time I really like this card as well, and it is easily soul chargeable, so I guess it is not too bad to run it too. But overall it's just extra more power and it's easy to put this back to Soul. In which we go to Javelot Juggler. This card is just so good for the deck because it does few things. First off, it's kind of as a grade 0 while your Vanguard's Pale Moon. This is going to be very helpful because first off, it's kind of as a grade 0 in Soul, meaning that it's a grade 1 that you call as a grade 0, so you don't need to call a trigger unit, which is of course going to be very helpful. But the second thing is the second skill, which fixes some of your board problems, where when placed to rearguard from Soul by the act ability of your Vanguard, that is Pale Moon, put another rearguard to your Soul, and then choose a card from your Soul and call it to rearguard, and at the end of turn, put that card back to Soul. So it does few things like 1, it fixes up the weird board that Luquier can create, and 2, it's just very helpful that it's counted as a grade 0 because instead of calling like a trigger unit, you call a higher power unit, which is very nice. You mainly use it for that skill, but the second skill is so helpful that it fixes up boards. And I also really love that you can literally just shove the card back to Soul and then just recall that card back from Soul, because that can re-trigger on place abilities. It's just overall pretty good that you must run 4 of them. And then next we got the 2 Bubetsu. Yes, this is one of the Desire Devils that you're probably gonna run, but not probably too high copies of, because it can be bricky and it can be very mixed feeling. Because when a rearguard is put to Soul by the Vanguard's ability, you can counter 1, choose a card from your hand and call it to open rearguard, and if you have at least 10 cards in Soul, draw a card. The 10 cards in Soul is not where it really matters, it's the call part. Because one thing you can do is rearguard attack, Vanguard attack, and then Vanguard skill, put 2 units of Soul, which will trigger this one, and the 2 units go to Soul, you will draw, so then you will have at least 1 card in hand to call. But this can be a hit or miss sometimes too, because the called unit can sometimes be bad. But the key thing about Bubetsu is that it makes Venus Luquier more offensive, especially all the extra power you're already getting. And the second thing is that combining this with the order card, you can basically get 5 attacks with Venus Luquier. It is a hit or miss depending on what card is in your hand, but it is just overall pretty decent to use. I say 2 copies is enough, but sometimes I do wish I had a third one, so at the same time maybe have a third one, just so you can see this a little more often. It's not one of your most essential pieces, but it is one of your pieces that can go full on offensive. So I say pretty decent to run, just probably not a 4 of. And then finally to the last main unit cards is the Bilvis and the 2 Painkiller Dark State clone. So I might cut these out for 2 more copies of this, because this kind of helps out a little more than this. This card, when placed from hand, you can energy charge 1, which can fix some of your energy lineup, but at the end of battle that it boosts, and during the turn that you energy blasted 3 or more, you can retire to draw a card, which is of course going to be done by Venus Luquier, which is going to be doable. But the only thing is, this card doesn't really set you up at all. But it can do something where if you went second, you can go to energy 7 and energy blast 7 and draw, so it does help with that. But one thing I found with this, because I don't have any more extra copies, is that you can actually set up an early game where you can look at top 3, put 1 to Soul, put 1 to drop, and put 1 to hand with 1 counterblast. You only use it for the first skill, by the way, not for the second one, because the second one's locked to Magister. But the first skill sets you up so much is that because you put a card from Soul and drop, the drop zone card is another resource engine that you can put to Soul, and a card that you put to hand is also very nice that you could just shove that to Soul as well. That I actually found myself wanting to more so use this than this if I have more copies. And the fact that the deck so far doesn't really use counterblast other than Bubetsu and the order card, you practically have so much counterblast to use that it's actually fine to just use more copies of this. In fact, I might even run 4. But too bad I don't have extra copies of it, so for now it's like this, but I say this is probably the better card to run. And then finally, 4 PGs, because PGs, just wait until Pale Moon PG comes out. And then finally, the trigger lineup, over trigger 8 crits, choose whatever crits you want. I'm choosing Pale Moon theme. And then the 3 fronts, because you're going to draw a lot. And finally 4 heals, 2 being counter heals. So that's it for my new Luquier deck, or Venus Luquier deck, or Silver Thorn deck, however you want to call it. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend, or what changes would you make? Honestly, I already told you one of the changes I plan to make, but overall the deck is just fun and cool, and Luquier has been one of those debatable decks I've been wanting to build for a while, but with Venus Luquier, I actually ended up building it, so here we are now. But overall, the deck, like I said, is just fun. It does play very aggressively. The only thing is, it is very piece reliant. The deck just really needs a lot of pieces just to set up, especially to go to Soul in early game, so you can start hitting hard in grade 3. But other than that, it's just fun. But the strong point now is that the deck has so much counterblast and so much energy to use, is that you could actually put more cards that uses more resources of certain areas. And I like that. But overall, it's just fun. And that's really all there is to say. But in that's for this, and see you all next time.